Welcome into another episode of 3 Up, 3 Down. I am your host, Rob Wong. On this episode, we'll get into Max Scherzer's continued struggles, Dylan Cease's excellent return, and it's another edition of Remember Me as we look back at a former Blue Jay you may or may not have forgotten. Well, a series loss for the Blue Jays against the Phillies, who win the rubber match 7-4. The offense had a tough time against starter Jesus Luzardo, and will definitely take some flack for this one, but hard not to look at Max Scherzer, who made his return from the IL. Started off great. He struck out Kyle Schwarber to become the 11th player in MLB history to record 3,500 career strikeouts. He then struck out Trey Turner for career K number 3501. But then Bryce Harper homered in the next at-bat, and then the Phils got 3 more in the third when Alec Boehm homered. In the end, Scherzer allowed 5 earned runs over 3 1/3, bringing his season ERA to 10.23. He has now allowed 9 home runs in 22 innings. His K per 9 is just under 6, and his walks per 9 is 4.5, which is a pretty terrible ratio, to say the least. Manager John Schneider saying after the game he wants to avoid knee-jerk reactions after Scherzer's first start back, saying, quote, "You want to try to see what it looks like when he gets some consistent work and evaluate it then." I think he's earned that. And look, on the one hand, I do agree with that. As I said, we haven't seen Max Scherzer for a few weeks now. He's been working his way back from multiple injuries that he's been dealing with pretty much all season long. But at the same time, the results, the process doesn't look great. Sure, he's still able to crank it up to 95 miles an hour on the fastball, but the breaking balls just don't have as much bite as they once did. He's not missing as many bats. Even we go back to last year, he was striking out nearly 23% of hitters a year ago. It's down to around 12-13% on the season. So it's been cut quite drastically, and maybe you can blame that on the injuries that, as I mentioned, he was dealing with early on this season. But just the stuff does not look as sharp. It does not look as crisp as it did a year ago when he was having success at times, and we saw what happened for Max Scherzer come the postseason. And I brought this up even earlier this year when he was going through his struggles, that we might be getting to a point where the Blue Jays have to make some tough decisions on him. And as John Schneider mentioned there, he thinks that Scherzer has earned that. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. The Blue Jays brought him back for a reason. They're not just going to cut bait with him after one tough start following his IL stints. But with Shane Bieber on the horizon, set to make at least one more start in AAA, you've seen what Spencer Miles has been able to do in a bulk capacity. It's clear that the Blue Jays have options and they have some tough decisions to make. Jake Bloss is another guy that we've spoken about on his rehab assignment, as he could be an option down the line. Patrick Corbin, I know it wasn't great for him last time out against the Phillies, but he has given this team so many key innings that Max Scherzer has been the worst of the bunch. I mean, there's no other way to put it. As I said, the numbers now, when you've got an ERA over 10, it's generally not bad luck or all bad luck. A lot of the process just has not been great for him, and he's 41 years old. Father Time catches up for everyone, and it was great that the Blue Jays wanted to bring him back after what he did last year for this team and in the postseason. We know how well respected he is in the clubhouse, but at some point you have to start doing what's best for the team. I don't know if Max Scherzer, who's the ultimate competitor and has so much pride, is going to be the one that makes the decision for himself. I think, that would be great if he does realize that, this may be his final kick at the can, but not everybody can come to that decision on their own. Sometimes people have to make that decision for you. That's not to say that Max Scherzer, he goes out the next time and has a much stronger start, and maybe we start to feel a little bit better about him in the rotation, but just based off of the workload this year and what we've seen, it's hard to be optimistic about Max Scherzer moving forward, and especially with some of the options that are coming down the line. So thanks for the memories, Max. It's been a phenomenal career, but very obviously he is on the back nine of it and maybe headed towards the 18th hole at this point. It's tough to say The career's been remarkable. It was amazing to watch him pitch as a member of the Toronto Blue Jays, and maybe I'm throwing dirt on a guy a little bit too early. Like I said, maybe he goes out next time and shoves, or at least looks a lot better than he did on Wednesday night. But it is difficult to see at this point how things turn around for Max Scherzer as a member of the Blue Jays. So we go from Max Scherzer, who really struggled in his return from the IL, to Dylan Cease, who made his return to the rotation and was absolutely sensational. 11 strikeouts, 1 earned run over 6 innings against the Phillies, an impressive 29 whiffs. He's now back to leading the American League in strikeouts with 103, despite missing a couple of starts. Watching what Cease has done this year has got me thinking about how, just on pure stuff alone, results aside, he might be the best starting pitcher the Blue Jays have had since Roger Clemens in 1998 and 1999, when he was on the juice, winning Cy Youngs as a member of the Blue Jays. Since Clemens, it's probably guys like A.J. Burnett, Brandon Morrow, David Price for his half season as a member of the Blue Jays. We've even seen it from Trey Savage at times with the amount of swing and miss that he can get. And man, I wish everybody could have seen guys like AJ Burnett and Brandon Morrow in their heyday. I know there's a ton of younger Jays fans these days, or maybe people that are older but haven't gotten into the Blue Jays until the last 5-10 years or so. AJ Burnett, Brandon Morrow, just two of the most electric arms you've ever seen. Nasty breaking stuff, high velocity fastballs, sort of ahead of their time. I mean, everybody these days, a ton of starting pitchers. We see it with guys like Jacob Mizorowski, Paul Skeens. The list goes on and on and on. Players like Dylan Cease that just have nasty stuff. Every team has someone of that caliber, it seems, these days. But back in those days, from 2006 to 2012, 2013, AJ Burnett, Brandon Morrow were doing some ridiculous stuff as a member of the Toronto Blue Jays. And I can already hear people yelling at me on the podcast here. What about a guy like Roy Halladay? How can you not include Roy Halladay on this list? And look, Roy Halladay had some of the nastiest stuff I think we've ever seen, but he was more about generating soft contact and going deep into games, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when I look at Dylan Cease, when I talk about a guy like Burnett, Morrow, or even a guy like Trey Savage, just the pure making hitters look foolish, I think, is more what I'm getting at here when I talk about Dylan Cease and where he ranks among all-time Blue Jay starters. I think, I saw people mention Robbie Ray as well when he won his Cy Young with the Blue Jays. I think that's a really good choice too. I mean, that stuff was ridiculous and unhittable at times. You could even throw in, as we talk about guys that maybe didn't strike out people as much, Marcus Stroman was pretty nasty. Aaron Sanchez with his turbo sinker and his nasty curveball. Alek Manoah, when he was at his peak, was about as nasty as it gets. And Dustin McGowan, another throwback, of course. So since Roger Clemens was doing his stuff as a member of the Blue Jays in the late 90s, the Blue Jays have been very lucky to have some really strong starting pitching. But Dylan Cease might be taking the cake at this point. I mean, every single time he goes out there, it's just unhittable when he is on his game. And there's some really good hitters on this Phillies team. Kyle Schwarber. I know Trey Turner's not having a great season, but I think he's more than capable of doing what he is doing right now. Bryce Harper, of course, it's just an insane, job that Dylan Cease has done so far this year. And a lot of people wrote him off coming into the season, thinking, why are the Blue Jays getting this guy who, really struggles with walks and doesn't always have the best stuff, and maybe he's only going 5 innings, and sure, he's striking out 9 to 10 guys. Well, the Blue Jays have really curbed that and have found a way to make him so much more effective, going from a 2-pitch pitcher to what we see now every 5 days, where he's throwing 5-6 different pitches and keeping hitters off balance and just getting some of the most ridiculous swings you've ever seen. So shout out to Dylan Cease, who continues to get the job done, and is such a huge boost to this Blue Jays rotation to have him back with the team. All right, time to wrap things up with another edition of Remember Me, where we take a look back at a former Blue Jay you may or may not have forgotten. And this episode's Remember Me goes to Corey Thurman, who was a reliever for the Blue Jays. Actually started a couple of games as well for the 2002 and 2003 Blue Jays. He was a Rule 5 draft pick from the Kansas City Royals in the 2001 Rule 5 draft. So the Blue Jays picked him up from KC, had a bit of a cup of coffee with the Blue Jays. And the reason I bring him up is because I remember back in those days, I was about 16, 17 years old. And I remember watching a pitch and thinking, man, this guy could be something pretty electric. And at that time, of course, velocities were not as high as they were these days. But this guy was throwing, 90, 91. And I thought at the time, like, man, that's some impressive stuff. But now when you look at it, it's like, okay, no offense to guys that throw 90 miles an hour. I never could, but clearly not as nasty of stuff as I would have thought thinking back to those days. But what I remember the most about Corey Thurman, in fact, is, during those times when I was going to games as a 16 and 17-year-old kid, I would be one of those autograph hounds, and I would try to go down to the games early and go down to the field level there where all the fans hang out in the stands, and they try to get autographs from some of the players. And Corey Thurman, one of the guys that signed a baseball for me back in the day, so I never forgot that. Thinking back to my days where I tried to get down to the games early, I remember Carlos Delgado was a Blue Jay that signed for me. I got him right at the dugout where it used to be kind of open towards the home plate side of the dugout, and you actually used to be able to walk right up and look into the dugout and see what was going on. And I think that game Delgado was nursing a back injury. He actually wasn't playing, but he was still out there signing some autographs for fans, and I was able to get his autograph. I think of another time where the White Sox were in town, and this is back in the day with Jim Thome when he was at the latter stage of his career, and Scott Podsednik, who was a really fun outfielder for the White Sox. I remember he came over and everybody was trying to get his autograph, and I was kind of in the mix there trying to get it. And I always remember Jim Thome walking by with a couple of bats, and he's like, "We're trying to work here," yelling at all the fans trying to get autographs from White Sox players. So he was not in the best of mood that day, but those are sort of my memories of heading down to the ballpark and trying to get some autographs as a young kid. I'm sure a lot of people have those memories as well, but that's what made me think of Corey Thurman, and that's what made me want to use him for this edition of Remember Me. But unfortunately for Corey Thurman, those 2 years with the Blue Jays in 02 and 03 were his only years as a member of Major League Baseball. Did pitch in a lot of independent leagues as well. He did go to the Cincinnati Reds minor league system later after the Blue Jays. Looked like he even was in Montreal's system in the late stages of that franchise before they moved to Washington, Milwaukee as well, but never made it back to the majors. So Corey Thurman, there you go. That's your Remember Me for this episode. If you ever have one, feel free to reach out at RobWong34, or you can reach me at the podcast account at 3_up_3_DWN. That'll do it for this episode of 3 Up, 3 Down. Always appreciate the feedback. Make sure to follow and share the pod on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Drop a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Let me know your biggest takeaway from this episode. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to 3 Up, 3 Down. We'll talk to you again on Monday.